Picture this a world where if you've got enough power and cash, you can do pretty much whatever you want. But then some guy with nothing to his name shows up and starts wrecking everyone's day. He beats up the guys, the girls, and especially the jerks who hit girls. Let's get into it. We're at the Valhalla Academy, one of the top 3 hunter institutes in the entire world. Every single year, tons of aspiring hunters try their best to get into this place. But with a success rate of just 1 in 500, very few make the cut. And of those, only about 150 students manage to graduate. You can tell the difficulty is set to real life, can't you? On the very first day of class, the training grounds are already a free-for-all. I mean, you've got people with bare fists going up against opponents with actual swords. Watching over all this madness is the senior combat instructor, Lee Sang-cheol. After a bit, a man named Yoo Min-jun arrives to check on the candidate from his family, who is definitely the one to watch. Her name is Yoo So-hyun from the Yushin family, which is one of the 5 most powerful and prestigious families in all of Korea. Anyone who steps up to challenge her gets taken down thanks to her insane talent with both mana and a sword. She's a rising star for sure, but she doesn't really catch the instructor's eye until someone mentions her family has been in contact with a constellation guardian. Now that gets the instructor's attention. In this world, there are 5 special beings known as constellation guardians, and it's pretty normal for hunters to receive their blessings and protection or even sign a contract with them. Each of these 5 guardians wields a different kind of power. The Yushin family is connected to the god of the sword. The Jangsan family has the god of spirits. The Jinchoi family has the god of martial arts. And the Oyeon family has the god of fists. The Jeon family is allied with the god of the bow. The fact that Yoo So-hyun has already communed with a guardian marks her as a super genius with incredible potential. People are saying that passing the academy test will be a total cakewalk for her. This is such a huge deal that the whole world is watching on camera. The 17-year-old super talent is about to face off against another 17-year-old named Kim Joo-hyuk. The instructors are actually a little surprised at how calm this kid is, considering who he's about to fight. Confident that this will be an easy win for their prodigy, the match begins. Our girl whips out her sword, but there's no trace of the other guy. She decides she'll just have to make the first move. Her swordsmanship was breathtaking, her control over mana was perfect, and her attack was aimed with deadly precision. And guys, you won't believe this. He just walks up, decks her in the chest with a single punch and wins the fight. Our protagonist actually looked kind of disappointed by how easy it was. And now we get the real story. Let's rewind 300 years into the past. 3 centuries ago, something major was happening at the Tower of Destruction. 2 men were locked in a fierce battle. The master of the tower, the king of destruction named Brace, noted that it had been a fantastic fight which had left the martial arts master Kim Hyun-woo completely exhausted. Brace was a strange-looking fellow with some odd blue glasses and a wild mane of white hair. Kim Hyun-woo agreed. It really had been an incredible battle. Our hero let out a small, tired chuckle. Kim Hyun-woo immediately snapped to attention when a system panel appeared before him. It declared that the Tower of Destruction and its ruler Brace had been defeated, effectively stopping the apocalypse. The massive structure began to groan and crack loudly all around them. Kim Hyun-woo quickly figured out that the entire building was collapsing now that he'd defeated the final boss. He grunted in pain, complaining that this was supposed to be his chance to finally live a peaceful life. He'd been working his tail off as a hunter since he was a kid, just to survive, and now all the money, fame, and quiet life he'd dreamed of were crumbling down around him. He briefly thought he should have brought his disciples, but immediately changed his mind. That guy had been the strongest enemy he'd ever fought, and they all would have been wiped out. He says his farewells to the world, one hand on his wound, and his body begins to fade away right then and there. All of a sudden, the boy's eyes snap open. Kim Hyun-woo had been reincarnated into the body of a young man named Kim Joo-hyuk. A full 300 years after the tower's collapse, and honestly, the timing of his reincarnation was pretty great. Even though his new body was pretty weak, all of his knowledge and skills had come along for the ride. He figured he just needed to get used to his new body, and then he could finally live in peace, until that glowing window popped up again. It informed him that in 5 years, the Tower of Destruction would return, giving him just that much time to get ready. He was livid. He had already beaten that guy. He thought to himself that he really should have just burned Brace's body to be sure, but there was no point in standing around with regrets. In this new era, the requirements to clear the tower would probably be easier, and this time, he was absolutely determined to survive and enjoy his life. Then something new appeared on the panel, which just confused him all over again. It mentioned finding his lost weapons and memories in a place called the Valhalla Constellation Room, located on the 3rd underground floor. He instantly knew what he had to do. It was the 4th day at Valhalla, the day they would decide the top 10 rankings. All the students who were called had to make their way to the stadium. Kim Joo-hyuk stood up excited to head over there. All the participants were told to take their positions. The crowd of spectators was buzzing with excitement as they watched everything unfold. This was the exact moment when the senior instructor, observing everything from a high vantage point, thought to himself that there were way more people here than last time. All right, time for the new guy, Kim Joo-hyuk, to make his debut. The match was set to kick off in just 30 seconds, and his opponent was already squared up across from him. Standing there was Oh-suk, the 17-year-old eldest son of the Osun family. Let's just say he wasn't exactly winning any awards in literature strategy or well martial arts. But what he lacked in brains, he more than made up for in brawn. The guy was built like a brick house. He could pull off feats that would drain anyone else's mana, and even a lazy workout session made him ridiculously stronger. Basically, he hit the genetic lottery with a top-tier physique that took zero effort, which I guess makes him a genius in his own special way. He was giving his opponent the mother of all death glares, looking like he was about to pop a vein. The two of them were just standing there face to face. So what does Kim Joo-hyuk do? Flips him the bird and throws a few choice words his way. Predictably, Oh-suk completely lost it, screaming, "You piece of trash," as he charged forward. Kim Joo-hyuk's internal monologue went something like this. Okay, this new body of mine probably won't win a slugfest. I know nothing about this guy except that he's built like a tank, so brute force is definitely an issue. But hey, just because the other guy has more muscle doesn't automatically hand him the win. Oh-suk wound up and threw a haymaker aimed right at our protagonist's face, but he sidestepped it easily. See, he had martial arts to boost his physical stat, and one other little ace up his sleeve. A quick leg sweep sent the big blonde bully tumbling to the floor. Oh-suk just lay there blinking, with a classic "what just happened" look on his face. Kim Joo-hyuk shot him a cheeky little wink, activating his ability to observe his opponent. He saw the perfect opening and landed a pinpoint strike. The guy's eyes rolled back into his head, a trickle of blood dribbled from his mouth, and then he was out cold. Total system shutdown. And just like that, Kim Joo-hyuk was the winner, noting to himself that if those two skills weren't working in perfect sync, the whole thing would have been a bust. Yeah, this body might be a downgrade from my last one. He thought, but it should still be more than enough to go monster hunting and get back into the hunter game. With his opponent totally wrecked, he strolled towards the exit, leaving a crowd of completely bewildered spectators in his wake. You could hear people murmuring, how in the world did a simple little move like that take Oh-suk down? Meanwhile, a man standing in the back was quietly piecing it all together. This was Oh Chal-shin, head of the Osun family and the so-called King of Fists, and he was fuming, listening to these clueless fools call that attack simple. My son might have ignored actual martial arts to focus on his physique, he thought, but he still should have dodged that easily. This time, though, it was completely unavoidable. Oh-suk had totally let his temper take over and just mindlessly charged right at Kim Joo-hyuk. He'd even used a bit of magic, something he almost never does, to try for a quick finish. But Kim Joo-hyuk just tilted his head a fraction of an inch and dodged it. Because he was so sure the hit would land, he'd thrown his entire center of gravity forward, which is what sent Oh-suk sailing through the air so helplessly. When the punch whiffed, his opponent was completely caught off guard, his hand still extended and wide open for a counter. That meant Kim Joo-hyuk had moved faster than Oh-suk's top speed, proving he had the whole fight mapped out from the start. A talent like that wasn't just good, it was monstrous. After running all that through his head, Oh Chal-shin just stood there quiet and lost in thought. The problem was plenty of other people saw the rookie's potential too, and not all of them were as clueless as the cheap seats. The name Kim Joo-hyuk echoed in Oh Chal-shin's mind. He made a vow then and there he'd get that boy to join his family no matter what it took. The stadium lights flared to life. A massive crowd of Choi Arin's fans was already there, going absolutely wild. Our boy was pretty amused by this army of fans. These guys looked like they'd already done their military service, yet here they were screaming for a 17-year-old girl and calling her Nuna, like she was their cool older sister. This was it, the final ranked match. Kim Joo-hyuk was up against Choi Arin, the second daughter of the powerful Cho-jin family. The second the match began, her sword was out of its sheath, gleaming and ready for the first strike. Kim Joo-hyuk just watched her, his expression totally calm and relaxed. For a long moment, they just stood there, in a silent standoff. He figured she was waiting for him to make the first move. Hey, at least she was trying to read the situation, which already put her miles ahead of the last meathead he fought. He let out a little chuckle, wondering what kind of fun he should have this time. So he just started strolling casually towards her, even as she held her defensive stance. Hands tucked coolly in his pockets, he sized her up with an intimidating gaze. She didn't flinch, staring right back without a hint of fear. She tightened her grip on her sword, and sparks of lightning began to crackle around the blade. The crowd gasped. The girl had already mastered the Chojin family's famous elemental exchange ability. And at only 17 years old, she charged forward, pouring all of her courage and focus into the attack. He took one small, deliberate step forward, practically inviting her to strike. She took the bait instantly, swinging her sword in a powerful arc that unleashed a torrent of crackling blue lightning. But then her jaw dropped. In the blink of an eye, her target had completely vanished from in front of her. Suddenly, a calm voice spoke from right beside her. "You know," he said, "it's pretty easy to dodge when you broadcast your every move with your eyes." She was still trying to process what was happening when a sharp, precise strike landed square on her side. Her eyes went wide, a mix of agony and relief flashing across her face as she absorbed the impact. Kim Joo-hyuk simply stared, not uttering a single word. Choi Ain desperately gripped her enormous sword, the sheer force of the blow sending her flying backward. Not bad, Kim Joo-hyuk thought. She'd actually gotten her sword up in time. That explained the solid clank instead of the usual squish of hitting a person. The weight behind that strike was insane. Before she could even process it, a fist slammed right into the flat of her sword. Choi Ain stared down her opponent, who gave her a look that screamed, "Bet you can't dodge this one." Then he unleashed a massive strike that sent her sailing across the arena, a helpless look plastered on her face. She came down hard, landing in a messy heap on the floor. Still, something about that last attack felt a bit weird to him. He was pretty sure his stance was a little off balance. Whatever. It didn't really matter since he'd won anyway. The results board for Valhalla admissions lit up, displaying the top 10 names with Kim Joo-hyuk sitting comfortably in the number 1 spot. He was just walking away, rolling a sore shoulder, when he was suddenly ambushed by a cacophony of voices that left him completely bewildered. It turned out a huge crowd had formed around him, all of them practically begging him to notice them and let them into his party. Finally getting annoyed, he just yelled at the whole lot of them to shut up. Over on the newsfeed, a headline was already making the rounds. Is Kim Joo-hyuk a raging psychopath? The 92 comments below were basically a roast session, everyone agreeing his attitude proved he was a terrible person. Everyone agreed that for a total rookie, the guy was unbelievably arrogant and just way over the top. The comment section kept buzzing, arguing about whether his skill made up for his trash personality. Back at Valhalla, inside its towering, impressive buildings, the first years were getting a warm welcome. Kim Joo-hyuk was already bored out of his mind, listening to the long-winded lecture on Valhalla's history. He caught a glimpse of another kid behind him who immediately darted his eyes away, looking incredibly shy and jittery. Kim Joo-hyuk just chalked it up to all the attention he'd drawn yesterday. Still, there was another matter he needed to deal with. It was that claim your weapon from your memories quest the system had given him a while back. As he headed over, Kim Joo-hyuk figured it would be an easy in-and-out mission, just as he thought that though he spotted something up ahead. By now, the opening ceremony had wrapped up, and he was standing right in front of the virtual combat simulation room. Kim Leon, a former lead instructor for Valhalla from the prestigious Trojan Guild, couldn't help but wonder what was up with these class rosters. He spotted Yo-Yeon from the Yusin family up front, Aren from the Trojan clan right next to her, and sandwiched between them was none other than Kim Joo-hyuk from the Osin group. They claimed the class assignments were totally random, yet somehow 3 of the 5 big-shot geniuses from the major families were all dumped into the same room. And just to make things more interesting, his eyes landed on Kim Joo-hyuk. Great he was in this class, too. This year was already shaping up to be a total headache. He took a deep, calming breath. Best to grab the reins and assert his authority right from the start. "All right, settle down, everyone." He began introducing himself. "It's a pleasure to meet you all. I'll be your instructor and the one in charge of this class." To kick things off, he simply tapped a button on the podium in front of him. The students barely had time to yelp in surprise before the world around them shifted, dropping them all into the middle of a massive empty field. Chaos erupted as everyone started shouting, totally confused about how they got there when they were just in a classroom a second ago. Kim Leon placed a hand on the hilt of his sword, thinking that maybe a little taste of his killer instinct would get them to focus. Just then, dozens of hideous, demonic-looking monsters popped into existence, roaring with rage and waving around crude weapons. Naturally, the students all started screaming in terror. He quickly identified them as orcs and goblins, and he counted at least 100 of the ugly brutes. An ugly green monster immediately rushed forward, swiping with its sharp claws as another one leaped through the air only to bounce harmlessly off a shimmering barrier. Kim Leon allowed himself a small smile. The barrier was holding up just fine. Everything was proceeding exactly as planned. With that settled, he motioned for Kim Joo-hook to come over. As he approached the podium, the instructor cut right to the chase, asking if he thought he could take on all of those monsters completely by himself. He was talking about the massive horde currently swarming the outside of the barrier. The boy took a moment considering his response in silence. Kim Leon figured the kid was probably feeling a little less cocky now. It made sense. Most freshmen had only ever encountered monsters on the pages of a book. "Look, stop pretending you're actually thinking it over," he said. "Just admit you can't do it so we can get on with today's class." But then Kim Joo-hook just smirked. That little grin immediately irritated the instructor. It was as if the kid was scoffing at the very idea that he couldn't handle them all alone. Thinking the kid was just running his mouth, he called his bluff. "All right, if you're so confident, be my guest. Go give it a shot." Kim Joo-hook just looked at him and said, "You really expect me to pull off a stunt like that on the very first day without some kind of incentive?" Hearing that, the instructor's expression changed. So that's his game. "All right, kid, you've got my attention. What are the stakes?" He replied right away, "If I can take down every last one of them, you have to grant any request I have provided. It's within your power to do so." The instructor put a hand to his chin, mulling it over. "Model." He played it off like it was no big deal, saying he'd take the offer. The instructor shot him a menacing glare, but the kid just rolled his eyes and asked for the sword already. I mean, how was he supposed to fight all this stuff barehanded? He obviously needed a weapon. Without a word, the instructor unbuckled his own sword and tossed it over for the boy to use. Kim Joo-hook's eyes lit up as he examined the blade, a grin spreading across his face. He slung it onto his back, sizing up the monumental task that lay ahead. The instructor watched him, his face a perfect picture of gloom, while all the other young trainees looked on, clearly enjoying the show. Kim Joo-hook gripped the hilt tightly, then charged into the fray, fighting the monstrous creatures with a fierce and courageous spirit. The chapter closes with him, wearing a look of pure fury, determined to cut down every last one of his opponents. One of the creatures tried a cheap shot from behind, but with lightning-fast reflexes, the boy spun around his blade, blocking the attack without a hint of hesitation. He thought to himself that he was doing pretty well, especially since it had been 300 years since he'd last swung a sword. Back in his day, monsters had made it impossible for humanity to function normally, so people used every kind of weapon imaginable just to survive. Still, even after all this time, the sword felt like an old familiar friend in his hands. His focus sharpened on two things at once, having spotted something fishy. Another monster was gearing up for a cowardly, brutal strike from his blind spot. Kim Joo-hook sidestepped the pathetic attack with ease. Everything was unfolding exactly as he'd predicted, following a laughably simple pattern. It turned out this whole thing was just a really well-designed simulation with NPC monsters. From the observation pod, everyone watched him, completely blown away. Kim Leon was baffled. He couldn't believe it. The sword he'd given the kid was a basic, almost useless training model. It had zero magical properties and wasn't built for speed, and yet this boy was carving through enemies with an unbelievable level of skill and grace. It was almost as if the sword itself was devouring those grotesque creatures whole. The girl was absolutely floored, while the boy just calmly took in the chaos he'd created. She stared at him through the glass of the protective pod, completely frozen. She didn't say a word, her face a mix of pure shock and confusion. "All right," Kim Joo-hook announced, "I've cleaned up all these small fry. I want to go to the constellation room now." He strolled out of the training area and walked right up to the barrier, then asked if the instructor planned on keeping his end of the bargain, which clearly got under the man's skin. The sun was beginning to dip below the horizon, casting long shadows between the massive buildings. Kim Leon dismissed his class, telling the worn-out students to head straight back to their dorms and get some rest. The boy was slouched in a classroom chair, thinking about what a drag that lecture was and just wanting to pack up and get out of there. He also mused that he'd never want to be a teacher. Heck, he'd never even been a proper student himself before. And yeah, while most of the class was a total snooze fest, he did pick up some really valuable intel, especially on the history of the constellations. In his past life, nothing like that had ever existed. Constellation was the name they gave to humans who accumulated immense power and became godlike figures usually linked to hunters. Valhalla here in Korea was the third largest academy on the planet and housed all sorts of constellation artifacts. Kim Joo-hook figured all this monster slaying and sword fighting stuff felt pretty pointless right now. He decided the best course of action was to hit the dorms and start training his martial arts, since his new body was still incredibly weak. But just then something caught his eye. The white-haired girl was walking up behind him. Over in the professor's office, a man taking a sip of coffee remarked, "Sounds like you had a rough day, my friend." Honestly, Kim Leon admitted it was more humiliating than anything else. He then asked Lee Sang-cheol, "Is that kid really just a high schooler?" His friend was stunned to hear the boy had wiped out 120 monsters in the sim room, despite never having seen one in real life. Everything Kim Leon was saying was 100% true. From what the senior instructor could tell, Kim Joo-hook looked like a normal kid on the surface, but he was definitely carrying some heavy baggage from his past. Kim Leon was amazed to learn that the boy was an orphan from a tiny orphanage in a really dangerous district. And it wasn't a lie, Lee Sang-cheol had already done his own background check. Besides, someone trying to fake their way in wouldn't pull a stunt like that at the opening ceremony to get into Valhalla. "Did he really ask to go to the Constellation Room?" Lee Sang-cheol inquired. Kim Leon nodded in confirmation. The senior instructor said he'd grant access to the first basement floor as per the director's orders, which earned him a huge sigh of relief from his friend. The logic was, since he was the one who brought the kid in, he had to take responsibility for him. Plus, while he didn't know the details about the top secret area on the 5th floor, a quick trip to the 1st floor shouldn't cause any major issues. "I'm just worried about what's going to happen over the next year." Kim Leon sighed, leaving his friend looking puzzled. Kim Leon voiced his concerns about the coming year, which only deepened his friend's confusion. The senior instructor knew he was in for it. His class had 3 kids from the 5 great families, and just one of them was a total handful. He didn't bother with sympathy, just mentioned that another class got stuck with an exchange student from the Ventric family, which actually made the guy feel a lot better. And this wasn't just any Ventric kid either. This was Rockdale Ventric, straight from the main family line. Kim Leon had heard the rumors. Word was the kid got booted from the British Academy for causing some major chaos. He let out a sigh of relief, thinking that, hey, at least his situation wasn't as bad as the class next door. Kim Joo-hook gave the girl a skeptical look, and she just stared right back at him, dead silent. He finally broke the staring contest, asking what she wanted. Her request was simple: teach me all of your sword techniques. Kim Joo-hook was completely thrown. The girl was practically begging to learn the moves he'd shown off, but when he turned her down flat, she looked at him like he was crazy. His reason was simple: because I don't want to. So if that's everything, he said, turning to go, I'm leaving. But she met his gaze and whispered, please. He shot back with the same answer, only this time with a nasty edge. I just don't feel like teaching you. Are you deaf? He snapped. I'm not going to teach you, so stop following me around. And with that, he walked off, leaving the girl standing there looking heartbroken and totally dejected. The next day, inside one of Valhalla's ridiculously grand buildings, Kim Joo-hook was sitting at his desk, completely lost in thought. He glanced down at his hands, realizing this new body was actually in better shape than he'd anticipated. Still without any magic, and with his mana being a pain to control, his options were limited. He knew he could solve that problem if he could just find that one thing, which would require a bit of magical prep work. Suddenly, a voice cut through his thoughts. It was some flashy, blonde-haired punk. It turned out to be Rockdale Ventric with his little follower Yura de Felix in tow, strutting right up to Kim Joo-hook's desk. Kim didn't skip a beat. And who are you? Rockdale looked personally offended that someone didn't recognize his family name. He puffed out his chest and announced, I'm not here to waste time. You want to get stronger, don't you? Then came the big pitch, an invitation to join the main Ventric family. In most powerful families, the side branches get the short end of the stick, but the Ventrics played by different rules thanks to their constellation guardian. Usually a top-tier S-class hunter, or someone even stronger, serves as an organization's patron. They tend to pick a favorite member of the family, granting them special abilities and protection. The Ventrics, however, cut a deal with a non-constellation, being to avoid any tricky contract loopholes. Because of that clever move, their family held massive sway all over Europe, and getting an invitation to join was a huge deal. Naturally, with that kind of family, power backing him, Rockdale Ventric had developed a serious ego. There was also that little incident a while back where he got himself expelled from the British Academy, but it was clear he wasn't crying over it. As he was being shown the door flanked by his assistant, he supposedly declared that he always gets his way in the end. He was confident that even with an expulsion on his record, the Ventric name was enough to smooth things over and put him right back on top. Besides, he knew a certain someone would get a huge kick out of it. Back in the present, he tried to reel in Kim Joo-hook. He figured the guy who had been the star of the entrance ceremony would be a perfect addition to his crew. So he made the offer join up and he'd get a personal introduction to the Ventric constellation. But Kim just shot him down with a cocky smirk. Rockdale was stunned into silence, totally unsure what to do next. Even his assistant had a weird look on her face. He was absolutely fuming, but Kim Joo-hook could tell the offer wasn't sincere anyway. "You're just a rude, disgusting little worm," Rockdale snarled. Out of nowhere, an authoritative voice boomed, "Everyone in your seats and you, Mr. Show-Off, sit down now." That only made him angrier, mostly because the man had the audacity to use his full name. The man was none other than the senior instructor Lee Sang-cheol. He made it crystal clear that Valhalla had rules, and this wasn't some cushy academy. The blonde punk immediately recognized him as one of the combat instructors. Gritting his teeth in pure rage, he stormed back to his seat with his servant muttering that he and Kim Joo-hook would definitely meet again. Kim just watched the whole scene unfold through his red eyes without uttering a word, and with that, the school day finally came to a close. Kim Joo-hook couldn't help but think about what a waste the day had been. He learned nothing about the Constellation Hall and instead got tangled up with that idiot this morning. He was still trying to sort through his thoughts about all the guild scouts. Not to mention the students and even instructors who were all trying to recruit him despite his less than polite rejections. Just then a voice popped up behind him again. It was that persistent girl, once again asking him to teach her swordsmanship. He sighed. Clearly she hadn't gotten the message either. Meanwhile, over at the Grand Valhalla dorms, someone in the top floor hall was absolutely losing their mind. And that someone currently taking out their frustration on a perfectly good chandelier was none other than the obnoxious and arrogant Rockdale Ventric. He was completely livid that some no-name orphan like Kim Joo-hyuk had managed to humiliate him. He bellowed at Yura to get Dara on the line, immediately snarling that he needed someone taken care of. As the scene closes, Rockdale is still seething with uncontrollable rage. He barked his poor assistant's name once more. As she stood there, frozen solid, he violently grabbed a fistful of her hair and demanded she answer him that instant. "What's the matter?" he sneered. "Do you still think you're the precious eldest daughter of the palace family, Ain Bey?" He then threatened to kick the poor girl out of his circle, which finally prompted her to beg him not to. With a vicious shove, he sent her sprawling to the floor. "Again," he commanded, "call Dara. I have a job for him." Also, he added, "Tell that second year from the Rise family that I want to see him." The terrified, helpless blonde assistant could only stammer out a, "Yes, sir." In a much quieter part of the Valhalla dormitory, Kim Joo-hyuk was meditating in his room, a faint blue magical energy radiating from his body as he focused intently. A moment later, he sputtered and coughed out a puff of smoke. Yep, this body was still absolutely worthless. It couldn't handle even a tiny bit of magic. He fell silent, lost in thought, his mind wandering back to his walk to the dorm earlier that afternoon. That girl had shown up behind him yet again, making this her second attempt to corner him. He'd made it all the way to the dormitory entrance, and she was still following him like a shadow. She just kept repeating her request like a broken record, and it was getting on his last nerve. So he threw out a ridiculous price, 10 million won per lesson. The girl's face immediately fell, and she looked incredibly disappointed. Figuring she obviously couldn't afford it, he turned to leave. But then she suddenly asked for his phone, which completely threw him for a loop. What for?" he asked, totally baffled. She explained she was adding her number to make the payment transfer easier, which only made Kim Joo-hyuk even more confused. Then out of the blue, his phone buzzed. It was a notification for a wire transfer of 100 million won. So now he was supposed to teach her his legendary masterful techniques. He told her there was no way and that he was rejecting the payment. Snapping back to the present, he replayed that moment of pure shock in his head. How on earth does a high school student just have 100 million won to throw around? Besides, if he did teach her, it's not like he'd have to reveal all his secrets. Still, that kind of money was a game changer. He could definitely use it for what he had planned. So who cares if his mana supply was as pathetic as a beggar's? He pushed himself to his feet, a new resolve in his eyes. It was time to start his mission, his first real step toward victory. He was going to locate the secret vault tonight. He set off into the complete darkness, pushing his way through the thick underbrush. He remembered checking beforehand. Most of the vaults he had hidden 300 years ago had been destroyed over the centuries. According to his notes, only 4 could possibly remain, and the real number was probably closer to 3. One thing was certain, though, they had to be in the Valhalla Mountains, and he was going to search until he found one. He began to focus, channeling his tiny reserve of blue magic. The vault's location could be pinpointed by sensing the enchanted marble inside, which was designed to respond to his power even with the smallest effort. A luminous circle suddenly appeared on the ground ahead. Finally, Kim Joo-hyuk had a lead. He walked up to the glowing neon blue circle and began to dig with an iron shovel, which served as another painful reminder of how weak his new body was. He grumbled to himself that if he'd known he'd have to go through this, he would have buried it in a much shallower, more convenient spot. Then again, if it wasn't for the Tower of Destruction 300 years ago, none of this would have been necessary to begin with. The world had been on the verge of collapse, and there was nowhere safe to keep his fortune, so he'd constructed massive vaults and stored everything away. He clung to the hope that the contents were still safe and sound just as the sun began to peak over the towering structures of Valhalla. And at long last, Joo-hyuk found what he was looking for. He'd hit the long-lost treasure vault. The location of the lock was a puzzle, but it didn't take him long to find the hidden mechanism. A normal key wouldn't work on a lock like this, so he wove a thread of magic, carefully shaping it into a special key. It slid perfectly into the keyhole, and he let out a small cheer. The door started to grind open as he threw all of his frail body's strength into it. At last, he stumbled into the vault, landing squarely on his feet in front of a staggering amount of golden treasure. With a gigantic smile of pure joy and excitement, he even greeted his fortune out loud. "Hello, my beauties," he said, bringing this chapter to a close. He stood there silently gazing at all the wealth with a thoughtful look. Now that money wasn't an issue, he could finally search for what he truly needed. Suddenly, his eyes locked onto something that made him jolt in surprise. The storage stones were sitting right in front of him. He had imbued them with a trace of his magic to maintain the vaults, and the day to finally use them had arrived. He scooped up one of the magic stones, and it immediately began to pulse with a brilliant blue glow. Yep, that was a storage stone for you, practically overflowing with magical energy, just like it was supposed to. He paused the magic extraction, figuring he'd sort out the rest of the storage stone's first work, smart, not hard, by moving the lighter jewels before tackling the heavy gold bars. It was another picture-perfect day in Valhalla, which meant Kim Joo-hyuk was, of course, completely passed out in his chair like a zombie. His muscles were already aching from just a little bit of work, and he thought he had to be some kind of cursed maniac for even considering building a vault in the future. Suddenly, she was there, again popping up right in front of him and asking him to teach her sword-fighting techniques. It was becoming crystal clear that this girl was not going to give up. He racked his brain trying to figure out why she'd singled him out, eventually asking Erin Choi about her persistence, since her family could teach her everything she needed to know. Her answer was simple. She had never seen anyone handle a sword better than Kim Joo-hyuk. That made him question her judgment. "What about your father?" he asked. "He's the head of the whole Trojan family. You're telling me I'm better than him." Right as she opened her mouth to talk about her dad, an instructor called his name, summoning him to the teacher's lounge and leaving him totally hanging. Still, he had a strong feeling it was connected to all the questions he'd been asking lately. And because he was dying for some answers, he shot up from his chair without a second thought, leaving the poor girl just standing there. She cleared her throat as if asking to speak, then fell silent for a moment, a slightly sad look crossing her face. Kim Joo-hyuk sighed and called over his shoulder, "Fine, local training field. 6 a.m. tomorrow. Be there." Her eyes went wide, completely stunned by the sudden turn of events. "What, you don't want the chance?" he teased. She snapped right out of her daze and practically shouted, "No, I do. I'll be there. I promise." Meanwhile, over in the teacher's lounge, the instructor sat across from him and got straight to business. "I have a class in a few minutes, so let's make this quick. First things first," he said, "your request to access the Constellation building has been approved. You just need to head to the basement. However," the instructor added sternly, "you are absolutely not authorized to go any lower than that first basement floor." "Understood," he replied with a nod, immediately asking, "When can I go in?" He learned he could go that very night and confirmed he would. Kim Lyman was actually taken aback. He had fully expected the kid to put up a fight about being restricted to the first basement. With their business concluded, the two went their separate ways, and the boy was out of the office in a heartbeat. Night had finally fallen over Valhalla. This was the place he'd been waiting for. It was the legendary Constellation Hall, the pride and joy of Valhalla Academy. He took in the scene, noting 2 guards in sharp black uniforms standing watch. As he watched them carefully, one of the guards was speaking quietly into a radio, reporting to someone. Kim Joo-hyuk couldn't help but notice the security was much tighter than at the main gate, which just proved how significant the Constellation building really was. It wasn't just the guards that caught his attention, but the building's exterior walls as well. They were covered in every kind of magical ward imaginable, completely sealing the place off except for the main entrance. Kim Joo-hyuk recalled his earlier question to his professor. Hypothetically, he had asked, how would a person get down to the second basement, and would that be illegal? Kim Lyman's reply had been blunt. It won't make you a criminal, but it will get you expelled from this academy. On top of that, he had added, you'd go completely insane before you even managed to leave the school grounds. This had left the boy feeling a bit confused. Kim Lyman then explained that the second floor contained the raw, unrestricted magical power of the constellations, and anyone who came into contact with it would have their mind shattered. The boy understood the gravity of the situation almost instantly. The instructor, meanwhile, had been puzzled about why the kid was asking these questions right before going in. It almost sounded like he was actually planning on sneaking down, but he quickly dismissed the idea, figuring that the academy's top candidate wouldn't do something so reckless. Since sticking around the academy was obviously the smarter choice, Kim Lyman had informed him. You have exactly 30 minutes inside. Got it, the boy had replied confidently. I'll be back before you know it. Suddenly, the system panel flashed to life in front of him, displaying the usual set of orders. He gave it a careful once-over. Kim Joo-hook couldn't care less about being expelled. This place was the only reason he'd come to Valhalla, and his primary goal was to reach the third basement. He wondered who in their right mind would build so many endless flights of stairs as he bounded down them when something ahead caught his attention. The area looked more like a giant foreboding prison than anything else. He was certain the Constellation Hall was supposed to be on the first basement level. None of this seemed particularly important, which made him hesitate about venturing any deeper. All of a sudden, the panel reappeared, announcing that the requirements had been met, and that he was being transported to the hall, leaving him completely baffled about what was happening and where he was going. In an instant, both he and the glowing panel began to dematerialize from the spot. In this strange new place, a voice called out to him, and go figure it was none other than his arch-nemesis Brace. His jaw just about hit the floor. As he stared at Brace, a look of pure, unadulterated shock on his face. Brace started some grand speech about the meeting again after 300 long years, but he didn't get far before a fist connected squarely with his jaw. Yep, Kim Joo-hook had decked him one, and man, did it feel good to finally see that jerk's face again. Hey, whoa, let's just take it easy. Brace pleaded, only to earn another knuckle sandwich for his trouble. He kept trying to talk things out, but Kim Joo-hook wasn't interested in a chat. He just wanted Brace gone permanently. Every attempt to de-escalate was met with another fist. Finally, with Brace crumpled on the floor, looking completely pathetic, Kim Joo-hook started to get a little bored of the beatdown. You know, I'm not usually a punch first, ask questions later kind of guy, he said, but you completely wrecked my future, so I'm making an exception. You cost me everything, my money, my reputation, and all those years I poured into my students. From the floor, Brace sputtered, aren't you even a little bit curious about where we are? Kim Joo-hook paused. Okay, fine, I'm curious. This place doesn't seem all that special. That's because this is a phantom world. Brace explained, a pocket dimension inside a relic. And just like that, Kim Joo-hook was totally hooked. Brace went on clarifying that everything Kim Joo-hook saw was just an illusion because his physical body had been toast for 300 years. The implication was staggering. Brace had been trapped inside this relic the entire time. Kim Joo-hook's mind was completely blown. A smug little grin spread across Brace's face as he announced, I've become a constellation, which shut Kim Joo-hook up for a solid second. Then the rage kicked back in and he clocked Brace right in the face again. Back in the real world, Kim Lyman was getting impatient, waiting for the kid. All of a sudden, someone materialized right in front of him. It was Kim Joo-hook, currently getting patted down by some local guards. Did you get into trouble? Kim Lyman asked. Nope, just exploring, Kim Joo-hook replied casually. Figured I shouldn't wander too far, and he added, I'm kind of attached to my head, you know. All right, that's enough for today. Go on home, the instructor told him. Kim Joo-hook just nodded and headed out. Walking back to the dorms, his mind replayed that bizarre reunion. He couldn't care less that Brace was some kind of constellation now. All he really wanted to know was what the deal was with that see-through pop-up window. Brace's brilliant defense was, I don't know anything, which immediately earned him another punch. Kim Joo-hook was clearly not in a playful mood. Look after you killed me. I've been stuck in this thing for 300 years with zero abilities, Brace yelped. That actually made Kim Joo-hook pause. He opened his hand and saw that Brace had the exact same notification window floating in front of him. The message was clear. Brace's mission was to find the reincarnated Kim Joo-hook and get his memories back. This whole situation raised a huge red flag, making him wonder why on earth he was chosen to be the new owner of the Tower of Destruction. Kim Joo-hook was floored, trying to figure out who this guy was and what his angle could possibly be. Honestly, I don't know, Brace admitted. My memories are all foggy, and they're not coming back in one piece. What does your window say? Mine says to find a weapon, and my memories. Kim Joo-hyuk replied, but the rest is just a bunch of weird symbols I can't make out. Besides, he added, I don't remember losing any memories in the first place. Maybe it just hasn't all clicked yet, Brace suggested. You've already located the weapon, so the other pieces will probably fall into place soon. The weapon, Kim Joo-hyuk asked, completely lost. This whole dimension is tied to the 4 village swords, which are now holy relics, Brace explained. I only became a constellation because I used one of them. You son of a... Kim Joo-hyuk seethed, his anger flaring up all over again. Snapping back to the present, Kim Joo-hyuk tried to wrap his head around the fact that his old village sword was now some sacred relic with a constellation living inside it. None of this made any sense. A part of him just wanted to smash it all to pieces and walk away. There was just one tiny problem. He gripped a glowing blue sword, his mind racing. He thought about Brace, the so-called King of Destruction, and realized the new mission on his screen could only be completed with that village weapon. Just then, a voice interrupted his thoughts. Hey you, let's see some ID. Great, it was a classic welcoming committee of campus jerks. The guy in charge, Lyric Sunrise, heir to the Sunrise family. Fortune smirked. The upperclassmen are all gone. Time for you to introduce yourself, newbie. Seriously, what kind of upperclassmen waste their time hazing freshmen? Kim Joo-hyuk thought. The lackey started chiming in about his bad attitude and how he didn't even say hello. I feel like teaching this kid a lesson. One of them growled, and the leader just gave a lazy nod of approval. The goon stepped forward, something glinting in his hand. He started on some big speech about the pecking order between first years and second years, but was cut short by a powerful kick right to the sternum. You guys gonna fight or just talk all day? Kim Joo-hyuk said, cracking his knuckles. And that's where the chapter ends. The loudmouth, with the short haircut, was howling in agony from the boot he'd just caught. Kim Joo-hyuk vaulted into the air, lining up another perfect shot, and planted his fist square on the chatterbox's jaw. The guy went soaring, looking like a busted-up ragdoll. He came down hard on his rear, making a solid thump that echoed around them. His flight came to a sudden end when he slammed into a wall. The blonde kid could only think one thing. Kim Joo-hyuk was a complete and utter madman. His eyes went wide with terror as he watched him. A second ago, the kid was empty-handed, but now he was holding a sword. Man, this grip feels amazing, Kim Joo-hyuk thought to himself. It had been way too long since he'd felt anything like it. He screamed at his goons to charge in, warning them. They'd all get flattened if they hesitated for even a second. Let's rewind 3 hours. Rockdale Ventrick had given the blonde kid a job that sounded like a piece of cake. All he had to do was rough up some pathetic no-name student. In exchange, the Sunrise family would get a sweet reward, no questions asked. Rockdale handed over the profile of the first-year target. He told him not to worry. If the kid pulled a weapon, any mess would be taken care of discreetly. So you in or out? Rockdale had asked. The blonde kid just nodded, saying he was on board and understood the deal. Without another word, he had spun around and stormed out the door, slamming shut behind him. He'd figured the kid's number 1 rank was a joke. A first-year newbie stood no chance against a second-year student like him. That massive power gap was just a fact of life, all thanks to the contracts first years make with their constellations. See, every Valhalla student has to visit the Constellation Room during their second semester. That's where they forge a contract and officially level up to a second year. And once you're a contractor, you can tap into the awesome power of your chosen constellation. So as far as the blonde kid was concerned, Kim Joo-hyuk didn't even have a guardian yet. He figured squashing this guy would be a walk in the park. At least that was the plan. Too bad for him, there was one tiny little problem. Back in the present, Kim Joo-hyuk was already in motion, his sword taking down another loudmouth. One of the thugs, clutching a nasty-looking crimson knife, spat out a curse. Then he heard a whistle through the air. It was the last thing he'd ever hear. The rookie's blade came down and wiped him out in a single brutal flash. Suddenly, Kim Joo-hyuk picked up a sound coming his way. Another one of these goons was trying to sneak up on him from behind the coward. The attacker chucked his pointy sword right at him, but it missed, completely sticking uselessly in the dirt. The guy just stood there, baffled that his big, powerful throw had failed so miserably. Before he could even blink, Kim Joo-hyuk was right next to him, laughing his head off. Without missing a beat, he brought his sword crashing right into the punk's grimy, ugly mug. That sent the goon flying, leaving his buddies standing there with their jaws on the floor, completely shocked by what they just saw. After a brief flight, he made a very unfriendly acquaintance with the ground landing face first. The blonde leader watched in disbelief as this rookie dismantled the second years one by one, and he wasn't even breathing hard. Second years are supposed to be worlds better than first years even before the contracts. But these guys, they were proving to be totally pathetic. The blonde kid couldn't wrap his head around this bizarre and unfamiliar sword style. It looked like the guy was barely even trying, just swinging with average force, but anyone he tagged could hardly get back on their feet. Kim Joo-hyuk turned to the last few guys standing and said, "Anyone else want to drag this out? Because I'll flatten anyone who wastes my time." The blonde leader could practically see the gears turning in his goons' heads, fight or flight. He shouted at his crew, "Don't chicken out, he's just some worthless freshman." "Wow, you've got some serious nerve," Kim Joo-hyuk remarked with a smirk. That was all it took. The blonde kid saw red and charged forward blindly. And then just as suddenly he felt a sting. Kim Joo-hyuk's blade had already found its mark. "You just gonna stand there and take it?" Kim Joo-hyuk taunted, before landing a final decisive blow. With the last bit of his energy, the blonde kid's final thought was, when did he even get that close? Then everything went black. Kim Joo-hyuk immediately started slapping the kid's cheeks a few times. "Hey, wakey, wakey." He then asked, "All right, who are you guys, and what's with the random beatdown party?" The blonde kid mumbled that they were all upperclassmen. Kim Joo-hyuk knew something was fishy. There had to be someone pulling the strings for a fight this dumb. One of the guys with earrings finally cracked. "We were just supposed to mess up the number one rookie's face, that's all." Kim Joo-hyuk scoffed at their pathetic display of loyalty. As he turned to walk away, the little punk with the big ego called out to him. "Hey," the kid shouted, "if word of this gets out, you're the one who's getting expelled." Kim Joo-hyuk just laughed. "Oh, don't worry," he said. "Everyone's going to hear about how a bunch of seniors got their butts handed to them by a freshman. Think about it, a whole crew of second-year students tried to jump a first year and got totally wiped. That's not just embarrassing, that's career-ending." Kim Joo-hyuk finished, "You might want to think real hard about your future before you start making threats, especially if you ever want to join a decent guild." And with that, Kim Joo-hyuk bounced, leaving a bunch of guys on the floor looking beat up and totally humiliated. The time was 8:28. Rockdale Ventrick was staring at his phone, practically willing it to ring. When Merrick Sunrise's name finally popped up, a grin spread across his face. He answered immediately. "So is it done? Did you give him the beatdown like we talked about?" But the kid on the other end just nonchalantly dropped the contractor's name and said he was backing out of the job, effectively closing the book on their deal. Rockdale Ventrick was completely stunned by what he was hearing. The blonde kid then gave him a simple piece of advice. From now on, he should probably avoid anything and everything to do with Kim Joo-hyuk. He couldn't figure out what went wrong with the kid. Just a few hours earlier, he'd been so sure everything was going according to plan. He'd even had a plan to file a report, with the administration figuring a few bruises would be all the evidence they'd need to move forward. If the blonde kid had just done what he was asked, he would have been hooked up with a sweet reward and the family's sponsorship. But apparently, the kid decided that even with the backing of a powerhouse family, it wouldn't be enough to restore their honor. And then he just hung up, leaving Rockdale absolutely furious. He let out a string of curses and smashed his phone on the ground, while his assistant just stood there, silently taking in the whole show. He then yelled for Yura, who quickly replied, "Yes, sir." She confirmed she'd already made the call, but since Dira was pretty far away, it would take him a while to arrive. The news that his muscle was so far out only made him angrier. Meanwhile, all the way over in sunny Mexico, specifically at the Araya Academy, a group of guys were sprawled out on the ground. A seriously built dude was casually looking at a fancy high-tech phone. In the midst of the mess stood the intimidating Dara Ventrick. He saw a message from his brother about a job in Korea, dealing with some guy named Kim Joo-hyuk. The reward was already waiting, which brought a huge smile to his face. After getting kicked out, he figured he was fresh out of people to hit up for cash. And just like that, it looked like his luck was taking a major turn. The next day at 6 p.m. over at Valhalla's huge training hall, Kim Joo-hyuk was admiring the sheer size of the place, already getting pumped and ready to put in some serious work. Suddenly a voice cut through the quiet, asking what he was doing there. He turned and was surprised to see it was Brace the Sealed Sword. For a split second, Kim Joo-hyuk's first thought was that the guy had somehow escaped and he'd have to rough him up and drag him back. But seeing that wasn't the case, he relaxed. Kim Joo-hyuk just planted his feet and started to stretch casually, starting a conversation with his former enemy. He asked about that sword that had turned into an artifact, the one currently stashed away somewhere in Valhalla. He was also curious about how they'd managed to get it out of the Constellation room in the first place. It dawned on Kim Joo-hyuk that Brace must have pulled a fast one, swapping the real weapon with a very convincing replica. When asked how he did it, Brace just explained that even after losing his powers, knocking out a fake like that was still child's play for him. Kim Joo-yak realized that Brace didn't even know why he had these weird abilities. Just then, the gray-haired girl showed up. Kim Joo-yak was right in the middle of a stretch and was a little surprised by her arrival. She immediately asked if it was time for her sword lesson, but he told her they wouldn't be starting that just yet. First on the agenda was improving her stamina. The cute girl looked pretty confused to hear that, but she was eager to learn and ready to tackle whatever he threw at her. Kim Joo-yak told her to start stretching right away, and she got right on it with a nod. It might sound basic, but he knew she needed to build her stamina if she wanted to properly absorb and control mana. It was a bit of a weird training plan, focusing on one thing that seemed less important than the other. The deal was Koi Arin had an insane amount of mana, but the physical stamina of an average student who'd never done more than swing a regular sword. She told him she was done stretching, and Kim Joo-yak immediately announced that the real training was about to begin. The two of them then launched into what felt like an endless set of push-ups, followed immediately by squats. On top of that, they did a whole round of upper body workouts. Koi Arin ended up completely wiped out, collapsed in a heap on the floor, gasping for air. She was shocked when he told her this was just the warm-up for their wild training session. Kim Joo-yak just told her to quit slacking and get up because they still had a 20-kilometer run around the grounds to do. A bit later, sitting in Valhalla's first-year class, Kim Joo-yak was thinking about the girl's physical state. He thought to himself that her body really had some amazing potential for development. She was sitting next to him, looking totally exhausted with heavy bags under her eyes and a completely worn-out look on her face. The class teacher then called for everyone to quiet down. Lilia, the high-class instructor and expert on dimensional monsters, cheerfully announced that they were having a little pop quiz today. Now she had given them a heads up on the first day of class, gently reminding all the students to hit the books. So today was the day she'd see what they'd learned about handling different types of monsters. Without further ado, the exam began. Everyone was hunched over their desks, deep in concentration. Even Cohen looked like she was really wrestling with the questions, while Kim Joo-hyuk was glaring at his paper like it had personally insulted his family. A moment later, the instructor glanced at a sleek, high-tech watch on her wrist. "All right, pencils down," she called out, then explained how she wanted the test papers turned in. This particular test wouldn't affect their overall rankings, but it was crucial for figuring out their skill levels for the upcoming practical lessons. After collecting all the papers, she let the class know that next week they would have their first official lesson in the virtual combat simulation room. With a quick, "See you all next week," she breezed out of the classroom. Kim Joo-hyuk was lost in thought after her announcement when Brace suddenly started grilling him about how he tackled the test, shocking him that Brace had been paying that much attention. Brace just shrugged, saying he was bored, and then asked what was going through the hero's mind. Kim Joo-hyuk clarified that technically, Brace could only eavesdrop on his thoughts if they were somehow related to Brace himself. "I just wrote down what I knew," Kim Joo-hyuk said, simply to which Brace replied, "Gotcha." Meanwhile, over in Valhalla's first-year faculty lounge, their teacher was absolutely fuming over Kim Joo-hyuk's test, wondering how he had the nerve to call that garbage an answer. Just then, Kim Lingen strolled past a mug in his hand. He was suddenly aware of some odd grumbling noises nearby and saw their instructor looking like she was about to explode. He wandered over and asked, "Are those the tests from your class?" She confirmed they were explaining how she used the exam to prep for the next lesson, and that there was a lot of hidden depth in the seemingly simple questions. "As you'd expect from Class A, full of prodigies from the best families, everyone aced it," she noted, which seemed to surprise Kim Lingun. He just nodded and said, "Well, I'll let you get back to it," and she gave him a little wave. He took another sip of whatever was in his white mug. Suddenly, a blood-curdling scream made him jump, sending the entire contents of his cup splashing everywhere. The furious shout had come from the teacher, who was now staring at Kim Joo-hyuk's test paper. He cautiously approached and asked, "Did the prodigy not do so well?" "He's making a complete mockery of my class," she seethed, which left him speechless. "Oh, I am not letting this slide," Lilia declared. "I'm going to display all his answers next class. We'll see how easy it is to handle monsters his way." A week later, in Valhalla's virtual combat room, Lilia announced she had finished grading the tests from their last session. "While most of you did wonderfully," she said with a tight smile, "there was one exception. Kim Joo-hyuk, would you please step forward?" He walked to the front without a hint of hesitation, and the two stood face to face. Lilia handed him his test. It was covered in angry red ink. "You got a 0, the teacher said flatly. "It appears you didn't take this seriously at all." "I disagree," he countered calmly. "I put a lot of thought into it." She raised an eyebrow and told him she had a couple of questions. Her first question was about his response for the most effective way to take down a stone goblin. Kim Joo-hyuk replied without skipping a beat. Punch it in the gut. And for the second question, she continued. Her voice strained. What do you do if 8 wild goblins are charging you? His answer, send them all to hell, starting with whichever one is closest. The teacher looked at him in utter disbelief, amazed that he wasn't even trying to hide his complete lack of seriousness. The proper way to defeat a stone goblin wasn't with a sword, it just wouldn't have enough power behind it. Lilia highly doubted Kim Joo-hyuk could pull it off. I could end it in one hit, he said, correcting his teacher. His absurd confidence was starting to get on her nerves, but she also saw that he genuinely believed it. All right then, she said, a new idea forming. Since you're so sure of yourself, I'm going to give you a very special opportunity. Suddenly, a thunderous crash echoed through the training area as a monster let out a roar meant to terrify everyone present. There it stood right in front of Kim Joo-hyuk. If you can defeat that stone goblin in the exact manner you described, the teacher announced, I will change your grade on the spot. Kim Joo-hyuk just nodded and said, understood. He casually set his test paper down on the nearby control panel. He then picked out a single standard issue sword from the weapon rack and charged straight for the stone goblin, which was now glaring at him with a truly hideous look on its rocky face. The teacher already knew from his file that he had taken down 120 goblins before, so there was no question he had talent. But this was different. Against a stone goblin, any old sword just wasn't going to cut it. All of a sudden, the goblin let out a blood-curdling scream. The kid was already landing one clean hit after another, and his teacher was just standing there completely floored by what she was seeing. With a massive gash in its gut and a deep crack running across its skull, the goblin let out a final desperate groan. That's when Kim Joo-hyuk started pulling mana into the mix. He tossed the basic sword aside, sending it flying. He wrapped up the fight with almost zero effort, feeling no real thrill. One solid punch to the goblin's gut, and it was all over. A young girl nearby was totally blown away. He'd taken down a stone goblin with nothing but a sword and zero magic. The big blonde kid just stared completely speechless and in total shock. Even Choi Aron's jaw was practically on the floor. Lilia heaved a massive sigh. How on earth did you do that? She asked. He just explained that he whacked it in the stomach, which only made his teacher even more baffled. In her mind, you'd need to be an A-class contractor at the very least to kill a stone goblin with just a sword. Logically, that was the only thing that made sense here. And yet, this kid managed it with just a blade. So he asked, was that the right answer? Lilia just shook her head. Nope, that was only one question. We've got plenty more to go. The boy was getting a weird feeling of déjà vu, like this was all just going to be a repeat of something before. Without warning, a chasm ripped open in the ground. What he saw left him stunned, a massive, dark tunnel that seemed to stretch on forever. Teacher, what's this all about? Kim Joo-hyuk asked right away. She just told him to pay attention and keep his eyes forward. Then they heard a faint footstep. A handful of monsters started creeping out from the pitch-black tunnel. She knew that trying to handle goblins with anger issues was a real pain. One wrong move, and you could trigger their scream ability, which would just call in more of them from all over. The standard playbook was to either blast them with magic and wipe them out in one go, or just turn tail and run. And even though the kid could only see 3 goblins right now, every single screw-up would summon 5 more. Even with his sword, this was going to be tough, and Lilia had heard his sword speed was nothing to write home about. He then launched into a flurry of attacks, smacking the first one right between the eyes, which sent the others into a complete frenzy. The green goblin stayed on its toes during the fight, but it wasn't long before a blow landed square on its cursed mouth, sending it crashing violently to its knees. The teacher was seriously impressed by the whole display, while the boy got a little cocky, bragging that he'd nailed the second question too. Another day, another workout at the Valhalla Training Center. Kim Joo-hyuk and Choi Aron were on the treadmills, going at a pace that was just insane. The speed indicators on their machines were completely off the charts. Before long, the gray-haired girl stumbled and collapsed onto the floor, totally wiped out and gasping for breath yet again. Kim Joo-hyuk just gave her a look, a slight smirk on his face, not saying a word. Then he finally asked, "Don't they make you train back at your clan? You're struggling with a simple warm-up." She shot back, "We don't really push ourselves quite like this." He fired back, "So how do you expect to fight any of those crazy powerful monsters then?" "I can just borrow power from the constellations," she replied, "and use my magic." Kim Joo-hyuk figured as much. Instead of building their own physical stamina, they just leaned on magic because they had the constellations to fall back on. As long as they trained enough to borrow that power, skipping out on physical conditioning wasn't a huge deal, but man, was it a risky gamble. There was always a chance they'd get trapped in a labyrinth or a dungeon where a spell was blocking all magic. On top of that, their mana could totally run dry after a few long fights. And that's not even mentioning the possibility that the Constellation members might just decide not to lend them any power. After running through all that in his head, Kim Joo-hook turned to the cute girl. "So you think this stamina training is doing you any good?" "Of course," Choi-aran answered right away. "You said you'd teach me swordsmanship if I did it." He was a bit taken aback by her answer, mostly because that was pretty much the entire reason he was making her do it. She seemed pretty lost after hearing that, but they decided to just drop it and finish up for the day, since they had to get to the academy pretty soon. "Wait, why aren't you leaving?" she asked. Kim Joo-hook explained, "I'm going to squeeze in one more set of exercises." He started to ask if she wanted to join him, but then thought better of it and let the question go. Choi-aran gave a quick goodbye and bolted, leaving Kim Joo-hook all by himself, holding a ridiculously heavy weight. "Is Choi-aran really that girl's name?" Brace asked suddenly. His opponent simply nodded. The villain seemed genuinely surprised that she had gone through all that training without a single complaint. Kim Joo-hook shrugged, explaining, "The only reason I even decided to teach her swordsmanship was because she wouldn't stop bugging me about it." Answering another of Brace's questions, he added, "I never told her the whole truth, but I've got a feeling she's already figured it out." They both agreed it was pretty amazing how the girl had figured out his real strength just from watching him, which was exactly why Kim Joo-hook was willing to teach her a few things. Out of nowhere, a sound cut through the silence. Turns out some super jacked dude was right there in the middle of a bench press session with a ridiculous amount of weight. The guy was practically swimming in his own sweat, groaning like he was lifting a car. Then mid-grunt, his eyes locked right onto Kim Joo-hook. They had a classic awkward stare down for a second. Breaking the silence, Joo-hook was like, "So, you been here long?" The muscle-bound guy just explained that he always hits the gym after classes wrap up, and had been there the whole time. Then just as quickly he mumbled a "see ya" and took off. Joo-hook started mentally breaking down the martial arts potential in Chi-hyuk-ho's physique. Brace, ever the nosy one, immediately piped up. "What's with the sudden interest in Mr. Muscles over there?" He explained that Chi-hyuk was fated to be way sharper than the mages who just focus on slinging spells. So Joo-hook asked Brace, "All right, what's the deal with these so-called cursed constellations?" To which Brace basically just went, "Beats me." Joo-hook couldn't help but scoff. "Seriously, that's all you got?" Brace got a little defensive, shouting back that even though he's a constellation, he's been stuck in isolation for 300 years and is totally out of the loop. He also casually mentioned that Joo-hook could probably get the scoop on them himself by tackling the new mission in his Systems tab. That definitely gave Kim Joo-hook a lot to chew on. Right on cue, a system window popped up, flashing some new info along with a few warnings. The mission was centered on the heart of the great Valhalla forest home of the Mandragora, which made him pause. He remembered his professor talking about it. It was the final location for their first semester survival training. He grumbled to himself that if it wasn't for this pain-in-the-neck mission, he'd just grab his stuff and be on his way. But it looked like playing it cool and staying under the radar was the name of the game for now. Brace, of course, had to butt in about his quiet scheming, but Joo-hook quickly shut him down by bringing up the brawl that had just happened. He shot back that if he hadn't made his move, his own head would have been smashed to bits just like Brace's was. Besides, Joo-hook figured he was stuck there until the mission was done anyway, so the whole reincarnation mystery would probably sort itself out on its own. Meanwhile, across the pond in London, things were brewing inside the Grand Ventric Mansion. The whole place was your classic old money estate, complete with a bunch of eerie portraits that seemed to watch you from every wall. The scene pans to a massive dining table where a man and a woman were seated. The woman didn't waste a single second getting down to business. This was Adelia Ventric, the family's second-in-command, and she was demanding a full report on recent events. The man reported that the labyrinth near Reading had officially been cleared. Adelia gave a curt nod and asked if there was anything else worth mentioning. He added that he was thinking about recruiting a couple of skilled individuals he'd run into, highlighting a particular survivor from the robber clan. His boss pressed him for more info, and he explained that the guy was a real powerhouse and his companions were all A-class contractors. Adelia gave the green light to grant them the Ventric family blessing. She ordered him to put them through their paces with a few capability tests, which the man readily agreed to. She then asked again, "Is that everything for today?" Just then he let her know he had one last update, this one concerning Rockdeal Ventric. He'd caught wind of a recent development and informed her that Deezer had been summoned all the way to South Korea. Adelia's face instantly hardened with fury. Deezer Ventrick was the family's black sheep, an absolute train wreck of a delinquent. He had dragged their family name through the mud with countless awful deeds, like that time he offed 5 people at the British Academy when he was just 19 all over a dumb argument. By the time he hit 20, the Ventrick family had officially cut him loose for good. Adelia mulled over the fact he'd been laying low for years, only to pop up now to meet with Rockdeal. She gave the order to put a tail on Rockdeal immediately, to which her subordinate gave a sharp understood. The man was also told to warn that arrogant kid that if he was caught stepping out of line, he'd be kicked out of the family for good. The man confirmed her orders one last time, stated his report was finished, and made a swift exit, leaving Adelia to stew by herself in the massive room. She sat in silence, her expression thoughtful, as she fumed about all the damn fools running around with powers they never even earned. That kind of ability was on a whole other level. Carved right into her chair was the motto, all for one, and everything is only for one person. In her mind, every power was ultimately destined to become hers. Lost in her world, she glanced up as if searching for some kind of sign. Her eyes settled on the creepy painting of the Guardian constellation on the wall. Back in the classroom at Valhalla, the professor was droning on about the origins of the word malefactor. He explained that in today's world, the term is basically just a fancy word for someone who uses constellation powers for shady business. These malefactors sometimes worked solo, and sometimes in crews. Of all these groups, the most infamous was the one known simply as One God. Kim Joo-hyuk zoned out, thinking to himself that while working out definitely made him feel tougher, he also seemed to have a real knack for handling mana. He wasn't a prodigy or anything, but he was light years better than he was before this whole reincarnation thing. Even so, something just wasn't quite clicking into place. This got him wondering just why his body had been in such terrible shape before. When he first tried to move his mana around, he could barely manage it since his reserves were lower than an average person's, and his stamina was so pathetic that a little bit of digging almost made him pass out. But still, even with a body that weak, it shouldn't have been that bad. Something fishy must have happened in the past, but there was no point in losing sleep over it now. All of a sudden, a finger tapped his desk. He glanced over, perfectly cool and collected. It was the gorgeous Yu So-yan. She dropped a crumpled piece of paper on his desk, which took him by surprise. On it was written a single word, "Hi." Kim Joo-hyuk had to wonder what on earth this was all about. A bit later, Kim Limon made an announcement that students could head off campus for the weekend as long as they put in a request for it. And with that simple notice, he wrapped up the lesson. Kim Joo-hyuk mulled over the idea of getting away for a bit. He quickly scribbled down a request for a Saturday trip using a pretty lame excuse. Grace was shocked by his decision, but after he confirmed he was serious, she asked where he was planning to go. Before he could say a word, though, he heard someone call his name. It was a cute girl dressed in a really nice outfit. The two of them had a short chat about the awkwardness from a few hours prior. Kim Joo-hyuk had even been nice enough to reply to her note, but she never wrote back. He nudged her to get to the point, explaining that he was busy and needed to turn something in. The young girl stumbled over her words, too shy to get a single coherent sentence out without stopping and starting. Kim Joo-hyuk was losing his patience, calling her a weirdo and telling her to just nod if she couldn't talk. She got furious at being insulted like that. She challenged his comment, but he just shot back that getting on people's nerves for no reason was kind of her specialty. He then asked again what she actually wanted from him. Her mind flashed back to when she'd been watching something Kim Joo-hyuk's fight with that hideous and grotesque stone goblin. She had been totally floored by that fight, mainly because the guy had used nothing but a sword, without a lick of magic. It was completely different from what the textbooks taught. All she wanted was to ask him how he managed to kill that ugly stone thing, but her pride was just too big to let her. Finally, with a sigh, she worked up the nerve to ask. But right as she was about to open her mouth, the teacher showed up and asked the very question she was about to ask. The gray-haired woman with glasses seemed incredibly excited to learn his secrets. Kim Joo-hyuk could only wonder where this crazy lady had materialized from. He immediately asked why she was butting in, all of a sudden thinking she hated his guts, which left her looking confused. He tried again, rephrasing it, "Don't you dislike me because I embarrassed you?" The teacher shot back that she couldn't care less about that. She'd always thought there was just one way to kill monsters, but he had proved her wrong. She had to know everything, and she had to know it now. She asked if he wanted to be her assistant, but he gave her a firm no, explaining he had to submit his leave form right away. That eccentric woman tried every trick in the book to change his mind with no luck, and the two of them ended up walking off, leaving the cute girl standing there all by herself. She stood there for a moment, thinking about the teacher's words, feeling completely lost. Taking a deep breath, she calmed down and decided to just forget the whole thing, telling herself she didn't need that kind of hassle. The following day, Kim Joo-hyuk was standing in front of something that left him speechless. A massive, sprawling market unfolded before him, bringing the chapter to a close. Back in his huge dorm room at Valhalla, Kim Joo-hyuk was already sitting at his gaming computer. Grace asked him what he was looking up on his phone, and he replied that he was just getting some info on the place he was going to the next day. The hero of our story needed to find a market where he could sell the treasure he'd found in the vault, and this place seemed like a solid bet. If he was understanding all this correctly, then he had definitely found what he was looking for. There was a virtual marketplace accessible right from his phone. According to what he read, you just paid an entry fee and could trade almost anything in what was basically a risky dark web shopping mall. The reason a bizarre market like this could even exist was because its founder was a guardian constellation. According to the main character of the story, this being was known as the Secret Ruler. Because of this, even high-level people used the platform openly, and despite it being completely illegal, no government would dare to mess with it. That was also why he'd managed to find instructions on how to get in so easily. Deciding to go for it, Kim Joo-hyuk browsed a few simple tutorials online. He quickly saw a link posted in the comments section of an article he was reading. Suddenly, a few messages popped up from the little girl, Choi Ain. They were a series of bunny emojis crying their eyes out. She told her trainer that she'd be skipping the next day's training, to which he simply replied that he had plans as well. Kim Joo-hyuk tapped out a few laughing replies between their messages. All this left Choi Ain totally stumped. He had to quickly clarify that he was just wishing her a safe journey. He also gently suggested she might want to cool it with the emojis. Kim Joo-hyuk briefly puzzled over the virtual bunnies before shaking it off to focus on the real task, locking down a time and place. He tapped a rather sketchy-looking icon on his phone. Before long, he slipped out of his house, cloaked in dark clothes, with the hood of his long sweatshirt pulled low over his face. The spot wasn't far, probably some old cafe tucked away in the neighborhood, and what do you know, the entrance was right in front of him. The building's wooden door looked ancient, and the inside was a complete disaster zone. Kim Joo-hyuk cautiously pushed it open and slipped through. All he had to do was get inside and make his way to the right corner. The meeting point had to be right around there. He placed a hand on the gray door, pushed it open, and crept into another room. A moment later, an incredible sight unfolded before him. He was standing in the middle of a massive black market. Night was settling in, and the moon was a brilliant splash against the dark sky, making the whole scene feel surreal to Kim Joo-hyuk. It was his first visit, yet everything felt strangely familiar. The purplish sky, the clouds, the moon, it was just like a night he remembered from 300 years ago. Out of nowhere, a man appeared and asked if this was his first time here. The guy had a friendly vibe, dressed in all black, with some serious bangs going on. Kim Joo-hyuk sized him up thinking, is this the employee from the online post? That leather jacket definitely rang a bell. The man confirmed he was the guy and started explaining how the market worked, but the protagonist already had a decent grasp of the rules. He handed over a thick wad of cash, earning a quick thanks from the employee. As he did, Kim Joo-hyuk couldn't help but think about the money he just spent versus the fortune he was about to make. There was one thing he needed to ask the guy in black. He needed to know the best place to unload all the jewels he was carrying, but he shot down the man's assumption he had no interest in putting them up for auction. He just wanted to sell them off fast and easy. The man suggested heading to the 3rd District Market, saying the merchants there would buy practically anything. Kim Joo-hyuk paused, wondering who would be the most reliable person to deal with over there. The employee didn't miss a beat, saying a fella named Morris was known for giving the best deals. The man in black gave him directions to the 3rd District, and our visitor was incredibly thankful. But the guy had one last piece of friendly advice. He strongly recommended that Kim Joo-hyuk put on a mask before heading into that area. He explained that, given the kind of stuff that gets traded, there pretty much everyone keeps their face covered. And to top it off, he handed Kim Joo-hyuk a complimentary mask, who accepted it with sincere gratitude. "Enjoy your time," the man in black said as he left. Now in the 3rd District of the Grand Black Market, a figure in a white mask was carefully examining a brilliant, sparkling diamond. Kim Joo-hyuk walked right up and asked if he was the man he was looking for. The guy confirmed he was indeed Morris, the one with the fair prices. Our protagonist got straight to the point, saying he had some high-value items to sell. Morris said it would really depend on what he had, but mentioned that if it was simple gold or jewelry, the appraisal would be quick and painless. Without another word, Kim Joo-hyuk started pulling things from his oversized backpack. A moment later, a heavy-looking black sack emerged. He declared that he wanted to sell everything inside it. Morris's curiosity was piqued. He immediately started his appraisal with a ring from the bag. Suddenly, his professional calm vanished, replaced by sheer astonishment at what he was holding. This ring was a rare artifact from the Age of Ruin. No matter how he looked at it, the piece was undeniably ancient and unbelievably valuable. A thought struck Morris. What if the other items were just like it? He peered into the bag where countless other objects were gleaming. The man in the white mask concluded that every single piece had to be from that same lost era. Just then a voice snapped him out of his trance. It was Kim Joo-hyuk asking him plainly, "So what's your offer for the whole lot?" Morris was completely floored. He couldn't wrap his head around how a kid this young could have gotten his hands on so many priceless ancient artifacts. So he voiced his suspicion, asking Kim Joo-hyuk where on earth he found all this stuff. The kid shot back that this probably wasn't the kind of place to be asking those sorts of questions. Morris, the man known for his fair deals, immediately backpedaled, apologizing for his slip-up. He mentally kicked himself for the blunder that almost cost him his sterling reputation as a straight shooter. He then admitted he had no idea what to offer for the collection. He explained that he couldn't possibly handle these items since they were artifacts from the Age of Ruin. He simply didn't have the capital to buy them all. Kim Joo-hyuk took that in, then asked where he should go to get a proper price for them. Morris pointed him toward the towering auction house just down the way. Kim Joo-hyuk had one more question. How long would an auction typically take? Morris figured it would be about 2 to 3 weeks since so many people had things booked, slowing the whole process down. After asking a few more questions, Kim Joo-hyuk learned he'd have to personally come back to the market later. He mentally groaned at all the annoying red tape involved. He then cut to the chase, asking for a ballpark estimate of what his items might fetch at auction, which made Mr. Morris pause thoughtfully. A moment later, Morris pulled out his phone, showed him the estimated figure, and left the young man completely floored. The kid stared, trying to count all the zeros on the screen. No wonder this stuff was so pricey back in the day, which was exactly why he'd held on to it. He then asked how much of that total estimate Morris could actually pay him up front. The man admitted he could only cover about 3/4 of the total, and that was if he sold everything he had. A bit bewildered, Kim Joo-hyuk asked if he was serious. He then shocked the man by immediately accepting the offer, which left Morris utterly surprised, baffled, and just plain stunned. You see, artifacts from the Age of Ruin weren't just valuable because they were ancient. The other huge factor was the constellations. They started showing up after that era, and for some strange reason had a special affinity for relics from that time. Morris figured that with one of these items, even a complete nobody could land a contract with a powerful constellation, and the Alchemist Zone was still running. He picked up a shimmering, incredibly magical ring, and a second inspection left him even more impressed. The mana flowed through it perfectly. It felt like the very magic from the end of the Age of Ruin was still humming inside, showing all the right signs. He was absolutely ecstatic, having snagged 8 priceless artifacts from that era for such a steal. Morris snatched up the small pouch the jewels were in. He was beaming as he put them inside, thinking today was definitely his lucky day. Suddenly he sensed a presence behind him. His eyes shot open with a jolt of fear. Standing there was a figure draped in black, wearing a menacing black mask. And just like that, the merchant's celebration came to an abrupt end. In another place, a colossal door stood before Kim Joo-hyuk. He pushed it open with all his strength. The first thing he did was yank the mask off his face. The thing was so stuffy he seriously thought he might suffocate in there. The place looked a lot like the cafe from his starting point. He immediately pulled out his phone to check his recent account activity. With that one sale, his money problems were history. He grinned, celebrating the massive payout from those 8 rings in his vault. Kim Joo-hyuk was on cloud 9, especially since he had a whole stash of them left. He was pretty much set for the foreseeable future. Just then, a strange notification popped up on his phone, a call from an unknown number. He answered it without a second thought. A woman on the other end immediately invited him out for a meal. He asked how she got his number, and she quickly explained she was an instructor from Valhalla. Before he could get another word in, she rattled off the meeting location and hung up, leaving him pretty annoyed by the whole thing. After a moment, Kim Joo-hyuk decided he might as well go. It wasn't like he had anything better to do, and hey, if some weird girl wanted to spend her own money on a free meal for him, who was he to argue? And that was the end of that very strange invitation. Now let's get back to the guy in the black mask and clothes. Morris asked what the man was doing here, and the figure shot back, "Are we on such bad terms?" Morris explained that a run-of-the-mill merchant doesn't get to just casually shoot the breeze with the owner of the market, even if they've crossed paths a few times. Because that's who was standing there, the market's owner, known as the Black Cat, who noted that he actually admired the merchant for being so blunt. Morris asked again, "So why are you here, Black Cat?" He replied that it was nothing major. He just found it a little strange that the merchant was suddenly joining the auction after such a long time away. Morris commented dryly that the anonymous registration system seemed to have some serious flaws. The Black Cat explained that since the market's owner is a constellation, he can access any information he wants. He then immediately demanded to see the items being listed. Morris agreed without putting up a fight. He thought it was incredibly weird that the Black Cat was taking a personal interest in this something that had never happened before. He tossed the black pouch with the artifacts from the Age of Ruin onto the table, leaving the Black Cat staring at it speechless and deep in thought. He finally muttered something about the true value of those items, which left Morris wondering what on earth he was suddenly talking about. Out of nowhere, a system panel flashed to life, saying that the constellation on the other side was observing in complete shock. The message just kept blinking over and over again on the device. The Black Cat realized in an instant that his sponsoring constellation desperately wanted one of those rings. Meanwhile, at a restaurant in Valhalla, a fork twirls a perfect bite of some delicious-looking pasta before lifting it up towards someone's mouth. The teacher takes a slow bite of her food, her eyes widening as she declares it absolutely amazing. A moment later, though, a confused look crosses her face. She pipes up, "Hey, how come you're not eating?" To which he just says he's kind of baffled a place like this even exists in Valhalla. She happily explains that besides the main school cafeteria and the faculty dining hall, they have a normal restaurant like this one too. Kim Joo-hyuk, however, couldn't care less about the restaurant's history and cuts right to the chase, asking why she really wanted to meet him here. She's caught off guard for a second before blurting out an invitation to be her assistant, an offer he shuts down instantly. Whoa, don't say no so fast. The teacher insists, explaining that there are a ton of perks that come with being an intern. She practically begs him to at least hear her out, since it was pretty clear this was what she was leading up to anyway. This piques his interest just a tiny bit, so he asks what these so-called benefits are. The teacher mentions a scholarship and other financial support, but he still looks thoroughly unimpressed. She adds that he'd get a chance to co-author a research paper with her, maybe on the 3 different ways to attack monsters. If a paper like that got published, his name would be recorded in the World Association of Monster Research, bringing him a whole lot of fame and cash. And still, he's just not into it. The teacher keeps trying, even throwing in the possibility of more days off from school, but Kim Joo-hyuk is a brick wall, leaving her trying to figure out what could possibly sway him. She then makes a clumsy attempt to appeal to his massive ego, which crashes and burns spectacularly. Totally frustrated, she tries to just put her foot down and declare that he's going to be her assistant, period. Kim Joo-hyuk just fires back that he's not interested, thinking to himself that none of her offers were even remotely good enough to consider. His main priority right now was getting to the center of the Great Forest, and even with her as his guide, passing the performance review was going to be tough. The protagonist then completely shuts down the conversation, stating firmly that he has zero interest in being an assistant or writing papers, which leaves her looking pretty defeated. Without missing a beat, the teacher changes tactics and suggests they trade information instead. Her proposal is simple. She'll give him some juicy gossip he might want to hear in exchange for the secrets behind his incredible monster attacks. Now that gets his attention. He quickly finds out the big secret is about Choi Irene. Kim Joo-hyuk immediately declares he's out, thinking he was just doing the girl a favor, but then the teacher drops a bombshell. She might get disowned by her family. That news stops him cold for a second before he tries to make a quick exit, which sends his teacher into a panic. Kim Joo-hyuk just explains that he's done with his meal and the perks weren't good enough, so it's time for him to go. At this point, the teacher is getting genuinely angry because she was really counting on getting some information out of him. He tries to explain that he doesn't really care since he already heard the whole story, then asks if he can just ask her something he's been wondering about. He lays it out there. Why is she so incredibly strict in class when in person she acts so childish? She explains that because her subject is mysterious monsters, things could get really dangerous if the students treated it like a game. The attacks she teaches about have a direct effect on student survival rates, and since the kids are a bit clueless, she has to be extra tough on them. Kim Joo-hyuk dismisses it as some simple philosophy, but to her it was more than that. It was the responsibility of a real educator. He just scoffs at the whole idea with a ton of arrogance. Just as he's turning to walk away, the teacher calls out to him one last time. She makes one final push for information, but gets nowhere, finally bringing this funny, high-strung negotiation to a close. In a different scene over in Sejong at the Chojin family's temple, a man sat at a table facing 2 younger people. The guild leader, Choi Jong-seok, had summoned them to find out their intentions regarding the upcoming classification test, which was crucial for the family's honor. One of the youths was a combat leader from the True History group, and the eldest son of the Cho Jin family, a guy named Cho Jin Jin. The other person was another member of the Cho Jin family, the one and only Choi Arin. The leader started by explaining that if they passed this test, they'd get the chance to form a contract through Cheonmu. Cheonmu is one of the family's sacred relics, and the contract is proof of who the rightful successors are. But there was a massive catch if they didn't pass. They'd be completely cut off and kicked out of the family, plain and simple. Choi Jong-seok then asked if they were absolutely sure they wanted to go through with this, and the young man agreed without a moment's hesitation. Choi Ah-rin gave the exact same answer just as quickly, and the leader just watched the two of them for a few long seconds. After thinking it over, Choi Jong-seok decided to give them all the details they needed. He told them the test was scheduled for 3 weeks from now, and that they were free to go for the time being, to which they both agreed. As the two were walking quietly towards the exit, Cho Jin-jin suddenly asked if the girl had been able to read the stars. She looked at him completely puzzled, as if she had no idea what he was talking about. The young man then clarified, asking if she saw the look on their father's face when she agreed to take the test. She didn't answer, just stood there thinking about it for a moment. Her brother just had to point out how desperate Choi Arn was, gunning to be the new family head, and finally prove she was a legit daughter. And yeah, you can bet the girl was starting to get seriously ticked off hearing that. But Big Bro just kept pushing her buttons, making fun of her death glare, and saying she had a snowball's chance in heck of passing the test. He really rubbed it in, saying she didn't even have a blessing from a constellation and was no match for him and his fancy foreign contract. You could just see the hurt in her eyes hearing all this junk from her own flesh and blood.